another Aligner Insider podcast. Hello, everybody in podcast land. This is Dean Steinman and Dr. Barry Glaser, and we are back with another Aligner Insider podcast for you. Hello, Dr. Glaser. How are you today?
I'm doing okay, Dean. Today is Happy St. Patrick's Day
Happy
to
St. Patty's
you.
Day, everybody.
Hopefully you're wearing the green. Today is
Jet
Wednesday, March
green.
17th,
Mm-hmm.
2021.
Yep.
I have a little Jameson in front of me, and not
Nice.
Jameson, excuse me, Bushmills.
Okay.
And I'm a happy guy. Hi, this is Dr. Barry Glaser. This podcast is sponsored by Merchant Cost Consulting. If you're like me, you're looking to save money on your credit card processing fees. Give Matt Ray a call today at 833-622-7283, and you can save thousands a year in your credit card processing fees. Again, that's Merchant Cost Consulting at 833-622-7283.
And I've got my lucky Jets 4-leaf clover today, and so you gotta think green.
Didn't know that was a thing.
It's always a thing with me, you know that. But speaking of the luck, have a nice special guest today, and we're going a little left field here, and we have with us today Steve Kivel. Steve Kivel is the president of Grand Central Watch, and Steve's here to talk about vintage watches and how to look awesome in your office there. So, Steve, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. Thanks for joining us. We're real excited. This is a little change of pace for us here, and it's for our podcast, and it's great to have something that's a little bit different. So, we'll jump into a little bit. So, tell us, Grand Central Watch. What's the history of it? How'd you start, and what's it all about?
Well, Grand Central Watch was actually started by my grandfather in 1952. So we're in our 70th year now.
Wow.
We're in a corridor in the terminal called the 45th Street Passageway, but its original name was the Roosevelt Passageway. And it was a corridor that you can go and walk through and underground under 45th Street and go right from the terminal into the Roosevelt Hotel. So, unfortunately, the Roosevelt Hotel closed about 2 months ago.
Oh, really?
And kind of sad because it was one of the iconic hotels that had been around, for a century in Manhattan. And, presidents, dignitaries, anyone who was anyone who would come in back in the day. One of the places you'd stay was the Roosevelt Hotel. So it was a very busy passageway, the Roosevelt Passageway. And, my grandfather always wanted to be in the terminal. And when a place, became available, he jumped all over it. He, it was actually in those days you could do a handshake deal. It's very different.
Sure.
Very different now.
Right. Interesting. So, it's 72 years. Great. And so how did he actually how did he get into it? It was always great to hear histories of families and businesses. So back in the 50s, if anybody watched Mad Men, or this is, probably the heyday then where everybody dressed to the nines and, would always wearing a hat and making sure you always had a tie on. So, people would be commuting, sure, back and forth into the city, and that, the suburbs were just exploding then. So, how did he even get into the watch business?
Well, my grandfather was an immigrant. He came here, with not a lot of skill, but one of the skills that he did have was watchmaking. He learned it from his father-in-law, actually, where at the time it wasn't his father-in-law, but later got married. And, you come from a small town, usually for some reason, you end up marrying someone from that town, because when you come
Right.
to America, very few people. So you're in a very small community. So that was the skill that he had. He wasn't even great at it when he first came here. His first job, he was working, and his boss paid him, I think he was making like $6 a week. And at the end of the week, his boss didn't have enough money to pay everyone, so he'd borrow a dollar from my grandfather every week. If we went home with five, you
Wow.
know. Of course, my grandfather went right home and gave it to my
Sure.
great grandmother anyway. So, and he got whatever he was able to buy for lunch or something. She gave back to him. So I guess it didn't really bother him as much. It probably bothered my great grandmother a lot more. So,
I can
So
imagine.
so was the business initially just like a watch repair booth?
well, that the whole thing was repair. It was then exactly what it is today. Back in those days, there was no battery operated watches. It was all manual, mechanical, automatic watches, and not even as many automatic watches in those days. And you could break a crystal, a hand could fall off, or your watch could get wet, rusty, stop. I mean, all the things that can happen today. Today watches are just built a little bit, they're a little more durable than they were. The technology's a lot better, but even to this day, in the summertime especially, I'll see somebody come with a water filled Rolex or a diving watch, and usually because they didn't maintain it the proper way and they went too long before servicing. But so in those days, that's what it was. It was a repair shop. It was run primarily, just my grandfather was there. There was no air conditioning back in those days. He used to sit with a bucket with ice
Yeah.
and a towel, and he'd dip it in and he'd wring it out, and put it around his neck. And it wasn't an easy life. It was a tough place to work because of the conditions. And our shop, as old as we are and as well known as we are, it's still a hole in the wall, the main store, where stands in the same place that it was 70 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
since then we've built a fancy workshop where we do all the work, which is not in Grand Central. It's in the building above it, directly above us. But the store where you would come as a customer to pick up or drop off is still in the same location where my grandfather opened.
Hmm.
So he founded the business and then at some point passed it to your father.
He founded the business. My dad started coming in as a teenager, after school, holidays, and he would help out my grandfather running errands, doing whatever he had to. And then, my dad went to law school for a year, and in between deciding what he wanted to do, he said, let me just come into the store and work a full time for a little bit just to see what's going on. So he stopped. He decided he didn't want to be a lawyer, so he stopped going to school, and that was he was there for about 60 years until he also retired.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
So tell us, a little bit about, the watch world now. Again, I wonder if this is like a lost art to a certain degree, because most people, especially the younger generation, Gen X, they what time is it? They take the phone out. So is a watch more of a collectible? Is it a fashion piece? Is it a timepiece, or is it all the above?
It's all the
What
above.
really is interesting? Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
it's all the above. It's what as a man, we don't have a lot of things that we can add to our wardrobe.
right.
Women, they got it all. That's why men really run the watch world. It's probably, I'd say, 85% of a man's hobby, as opposed to women. And the reason is what could you put on? You put on a watch, you put on a tie, you put on a
Sure.
belt, pair
Right.
of shoes, and then that's really it. So that's how it really started. And I think now more than ever, watches have become like super valuable. I mean, there are some things now that you can get a watch that's the price of a house or an
Oh,
expensive car. It's totally
mhm.
unbelievable. What has happened to the market, I'd say, over the last decade.
And what causes that? Is it just supply and demand? Is it that it's unique? Is it just somebody who's willing to pay for it, and that's the reason it is expensive? What would make something a watch be so expensive?
It is a lot, supply and demands. The vintage stuff. Back in the day, there were two companies that were valuable. It was Rolex and Patek Philippe. That was basically it. Yes, there were some Vacherons and some Audemars and things like that that would come into play, but not the way it is nowadays. Nowadays, I guess the celebrities, the rappers, the notoriety that some of these brands now get, almost like what Michael Jordan did to a pair of sneakers, and how
Hmm.
you can go out and you could spend $5,000 or $10,000 on a pair of sneakers
Right.
nowadays. I mean, explain that to me.
Sure.
How a piece of some leather and rubber is worth 5 grand or 300 or 2,500 or all over the map. I don't understand that, but I do because I live in a world of collectibles. So if if you got a couple of celebrities wearing it, and all of a sudden you got a couple of stockbrokers that want to go out and be real showy, and they got the fanciest suit and the fanciest shoes and the fanciest belt. Now they have to have the fanciest watch. So it brought other brands into play, like Audemars Piguet and Vacheron and some of these other companies that were making bigger, flashier watches. Because Rolex and Patek, they always kind of stuck to their guns in their designs. They really didn't go outside the box that much. And I think even today, although they'll mix in some color dials and they've grown in size a little bit, they're really purists of what they created back in 1950, let's say. The watches really, have not changed that much. And some of these other companies, they have. I mean, it's totally unbelievable to this day. I mean, as I could be in the store, I'd say at least 4 out of the 5 days of the week, I'm usually blown away by what is in my hands that somebody manufactured, that is going to be on someone's wrist. I mean, the bells and the whistles, just the pure size of it, the complications that now go into a watch,
Hmm.
materials that are being used nowadays. I mean, everything is just so different from what things were, when watches were out in the 50s to, let's say, the 90s or something like that, when it was just a watch. And now it's a thing of value, it's a thing of show, and it's a much more accurate timepiece too.
Steve, when you and I first met, you helped me, you gave me a lot of guidance. I was looking for like a timepiece, something different, and ultimately we settled on that Frank Mueller Long Island. And
Correct.
you very much encouraged me to look at the vintage market. Used is, I guess, is not the term, but is that is and honestly, I mean, the watch that I got from you was, I mean, it was brand new. It looked to me brand new. It came with a box. It was not a scratch on it, and it was really, certainly a lot less expensive than that would be the same thing new. So, like, how do you, like, in your company, do you specialize in vintage, and what percentage of that? And if you were going to, let's say, give our listeners advice over, let's say, acquiring a new watch versus a vintage, how would you go ahead and guide somebody like you guided me?
Well, I guide someone in saying, you have to be able to do a lot of research when it comes to vintage, and you have to be prepared to have more headaches than not if you're going down that road. The problem is, in our industry, service is the Achilles heel of every watch company, even the biggest guys. Nobody likes service. It's a losing proposition. It's hard to get watchmakers. It's hard for watchmakers to stay, productive. It sort of was like a dying art. 50 years ago, there were plenty of them around. It was a necessity to have a watchmaker because everything was mechanical. Then in the
Hmm.
1980s, that whole game changed, and for a decade, nobody wanted a mechanical watch. Everybody wanted a
I
battery
guess it
watch.
all it went to all quartz, right?
It was the
The battery.
coolest thing. I mean, it was
Yeah.
totally game changing. Instead of having this big clunky thing that you had to wind and set, and all of a sudden you were able to own a watch that would keep time to within like 2 seconds a month. And it was, the thinness of like a silver dollar sometimes. And it was cool, and it was trendy. It was almost like having an Apple Watch, where, there were different bells and whistles that you never saw before in a timepiece, and it was convenient. You never had to touch the thing. It was on time. You had to change it twice a year for daylight savings, and that was it.
Mhm.
So, that really changed the game. And those watches, you didn't service them. When a watch would stop, I mean, I could spend 3 hours with you and teach you how to take a stem out of a watch and put a new machine in and put the stem, back in the watch. It wasn't skilled labor anymore. You could take anyone off the street and pretty much train them. So all of those watchmaking jobs, they went away.
Mhm.
And, so there was no influx of new watchmakers that came into the industry. And then the 1990s happened, and the whole economy boom happened, and the internet stocks, and everybody was a millionaire. There were cab drivers driving around, on the computer trading stocks while
Mm.
while they were driving you to your next location. I mean, the world went crazy for a hot minute, but there was a lot of money, and everybody needed a place to put it, and it went into watches. So all of a sudden, the rebirth of the Swiss watch industry came, and there was
Right. There seemed to be like this, even now, like there's this bigger demand for like these heritage brands,
the biggest
like whether
demand.
it's Rolex or Omega and stuff. So there was a resurgence, I guess, of the mechanical watch. Is that what you're saying? And that happened in the
Well,
90s?
that happened in the 90s, right? That
Mhm.
happened in the mid to late 90s, and so there were watches, but there were no people to fix them. The companies, started their own schools to start training people because it was difficult to find help and talent, but they had to have it because not only did they have to service their own brand, that they had to fix watches that may come in that were from the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, things that had that brand name on it.
Mhm.
So it's a lifetime worth of watches that are coming into your, facility, and now you have to get them done somehow. So the problem is when you're buying a vintage watch, where are you buying it from, and who's servicing it? I mean, that's the name of the game. And I find, and it's going to be a scary number, and it's sad to say, but probably 90% of companies that sell watches, maybe even more, do not service them.
Mhm.
And if they service them, they don't service them the right way. They do kind of a quick clean. They take off the dial and hands. They dunk the movement in a solution, and they get it out, and it works for a short period of time. But what really needs to be done, the right way to repair a watch, wasn't done. And headaches and problems come up over the next year or two, and now you're in for a big repair charge, as opposed to just buying the watch from a place that already does that and gives you a product with a long warranty that's been serviced properly. Or, to answer your question, go out and buy it brand new, because
Mhm.
then there's no headaches. And I'm not saying a new watch can't stop, of course it can, but the likelihood of that happening is very small compared to buying something vintage or secondhand. you
Right.
know
Now, having said that, so if someone comes to Grand Central Watch and they buy a vintage watch, and I have to say, I probably at least once or twice a month, I just go on to your website and drool
Mhm.
because everything look there's so much I want, but um, do you is it there's sort of like a I don't know, like a certified pre-owned? Like you rebuild them? Maybe I mean, again, what I got looked like so new. Is there like a process that you take them through and then you warranty them so that a customer has confidence that if they are going the vintage road, that it's going to continue to work and that there's somebody that can stand behind it?
Yes. Well, so I'll toot my own horn and I'll knock myself off at the same time. We're the best of the best when it comes to servicing watches. There's no one that knows more. There's no one that's been doing it longer. And we take a lot of pride in selling something that's been fully serviced. Anything that's in my windows at any time that I'm selling, I've serviced from A to Z, and I guarantee it for 2 years, no questions asked. And especially on vintage watches, to see something guaranteed 2 years, that's not an accident. You can't do that if you didn't service the watch, because it's going to come back.
Mhm.
Where I'm not great is, like you just said, you went on my site and you're drooling, but I'm one of the worst when it comes to selling watches, because it's not really what we do. We
Mhm.
just, I buy really nice pieces, a very small amount compared to the big guys out there that do that for a living. And our business is service. Like, you could come to me, and if you happen to have something specific in mind and I have it, that's a home run. Happy to sell it to you. You bought something great. but my selection is a fraction of, some of the biggest players out, in the world. And I'll tell you why I don't sell watches for a living, because my philosophy of the way I run the business can't go with the way that the watch world works. Everybody's going to price shop, just like you price shop anything else you buy: a car, a watch, clothing, shoes, sneakers, whatever it is, you're going to price shop it. The problem is with mechanical things, let it be a car or a watch, if you're looking to get the best price, there's no way you're getting the best service that was done to the product. It just can't be possible. There's no way that watch was done, just the way the company would do it or we would do it, like this ultimate service where it was done A to Z, and that watch is like brand new inside. And why can't it be? Because if you did that, you have to charge an extra $500 or $700, on the front end to the customer. So now you're price shopping, and Joe's watch shop is selling this watch for $5,200, and the other three places have it for $4,500. There's no way that guy's ever selling watches. So everybody does it the same exact way. They buy the watches. Most of the time, they're winding them. They work. They're happy. They polish them, and they put them out and they sell them. And then if the watch comes back and someone has an issue, then they're going to take care of it. But that's sort of the way the industry works. And that's not the way, we do things. That goes against our whole philosophy. So that's why I don't really sell watches to where it's a business for us. I do it more as like kind of just a little gravy, on top of the whole meal. And our meal is the service.
So it's, obviously it's a very personal choice when somebody buys a watch, but in your opinion, and or you could jump in here too, what would you guys say is the essential watch to have for the successful orthodontist?
Well,
Is there
let's say the
one,
successful collection.
exactly. So if somebody that likes to look good, understands the value of it, is there one or two that is the ones you have to have, like a baseball card collector has to have a Mickey Mantle rookie card or something like that? Is there a
Yeah.
certain watch that you really should have as part of your collection if you are a watch collector?
Yeah, you have to have a Rolex. You have to have a Rolex. There's just no way around it. People used to knock Rolex. They were like, "Oh, it's Rolex. Everyone has a Rolex. I don't want a Rolex. Here's Rolex." But Rolex is they're the best. They're the best of the best. They always have been. Their marketing is phenomenal. First of all, the look of the watch is phenomenal. The watch is a tank. You could go to war, and people have. Most of the Rolexes, those Submariners that everybody loves, came from Vietnam, where soldiers went over there and bought them for $175, and that same watch today is probably 15,000. Some could be more. So you have to have that in your collection. You don't have to have a sub. You could get a date just. It's very affordable now. The only downside is that the date just, they're only 36 millimeters, and it works. It's enough of a watch, but sort of the sweet spot today, everybody wants like a 38 to 40 millimeters. So it's a tiny bit small, but you could totally get away with it. And I even love them on a leather strap. I think it looks great. So if you want to spend $4,000 to $6,000, you can have a killer vintage date just. Some come with white gold bezels. You can even get them in two-tone if you like gold in a steel and gold look. You can even get a solid gold head of a Rolex on a strap. And to me, that's one of my favorite looks. And the same thing, you're spending probably under 10 grand for a solid gold Rolex on a strap. So it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's something that's going to go up in value always. It's something you can wear and rely on. And it's got a great look, and everybody's going to recognize it and appreciate that watch. So that's for sure one.
Hi, this is Dean Steinman on the Aligner Insider podcast, and we are very happy to have with us a new sponsor, Merchant Cost Consulting. If you're an orthodontist, you must call Merchant Cost Consulting today. They will help you lower your credit card fees without switching providers. Many of our clients save thousands of dollars a year on fees that are unnecessary. Call Matt Ray at 833-622-7283 or visit merchantcostconsulting.com. You will not regret it. do
Hmm.
watches come, do they trend? Because, kind of like back in the day, ties used to be wide and then went narrow, then they went wide again, then middle. Is a smaller face, come back to, it was always a bigger face. I've got different size watches, and back, 25 years ago, my watch was a much smaller face than it is now. So, is there something, a watch is trending different ways, or what's the way right now that the trend? But what's the cool watch to have? A bigger face, smaller face, or is it personal trust again?
It's a smaller face compared to what has been around the previous decade. So before, watches were really like peaking up at 43, 44 millimeter.
They
A
were
lot of the
typically like the
Panerais.
dive watch style, right? Like a dive
Yeah,
watch.
I mean,
Type.
some of them are even 46 millimeter. It got so out of control and obnoxious that I think finally everybody said, "All right, let's back it off." Watch companies started saying, let's bring back the 38 millimeter. Like 36, a little too small, but 38 for sure is a great looking watch, great size. It's classic. You can't go wrong, and that's for now. And I think 38 to 40 is really the sweet spot for most companies and most guys. And then there's still people that love big watches, and there's still customers I have that love small watches, like 33, 34 millimeter watches, which were a lot of the
Mhm.
vintage watches that were sold back in the day. But there's something for everyone. But right now, the masses are 38 to 40 millimeter.
So now, all right. So you've got your Rolex. You've got your. Let's say you go for the Submariner. We're not even going to talk about the Daytona, which I love, but haven't quite found one yet. So, all right. So you have your Rolex. So what do you want? What do you add to that? For let's say maybe that Rolex is like your everyday watch. You could wear it to work. You're washing your orthodontist. You're washing your hands. You're not worried about it getting wet. What's the next watch? Maybe something that you want to. Not that you couldn't wear the Rolex out, but what's the next watch that you would add to the
There's two
essential orthodox,
watches
and also
that are
for males and females.
Yeah, there's two watches that uh, I think the Omega and the IWC are, really. I mean, look, Omega's a giant. They're right behind Rolex, and if you buy a Rolex, I probably wouldn't say buy an Omega, because at that point, you have the two competing companies trying to give you the same thing, like
Hmm.
a similar look, a similar feel, similar durability. They've always been in competition with each other. Go way back to the 50s. In the 50s, it was harder to get the Omega agency than it was the Rolex agency, believe it or not. So those two companies have always gone after one another. But if you went into a brand like one of the Richemont brands, like IWC, that's a watch that's very undervalued, in my opinion. You get a lot for your money. It's a great looking watch. It's a gorgeous watch. Some of them, they even, resemble some of the older vintage styles that they made, with the curved dials and the curved crystals. And it's, most of that stuff is going to be stainless steel, super rugged, sapphire glass. You're probably going to be in the $5,000 to $7,000 range there, and that's, once again, something that you totally can rely on, waterproof, and will do everything your Rolex will do, but it has a little bit of a different look. To me, it gives you a little bit of a different look and feel. And if you didn't go Rolex, and you said, you know what, I just can't, I don't want to be a Rolex guy, then having an IWC and an Omega in your collection, also home run kind of way to go.
Well,
Awesome.
I'm a big James Bond fan, so I have that. I have
Totally.
that
Yeah.
James Bond 50th anniversary Seamaster. I love that watch. But
Yeah.
yeah, we're pretty much if I'm not wearing my Apple Watch these days, which probably horrifies you, I have that Omega on, but I do keep the Franck Mueller for those special occasions. That watch to me is so. I don't know if that's a popular brand or not, but whether it's the Long Island or that Casablanca style, it's like so different to me. I mean, I get Steve every time I wear that watch, I get compliments on it.
Well, he was ahead of his time in his design. I mean, he really, that was what made that company, was his innovation of design. And some of the watches that he created, with the crazy hours was a watch that I always loved, where the numbers were mixed up all over the dial.
Hmm.
So it could be 2 o'clock, but it reads 10 o'clock. It could be six
Hmm.
o'clock, but it reads 12 midnight or something, because
Hmm.
the hour hand would jump to whatever the hour was on the watch. And it's like that, and then he had multi-complicated different time zoned watches, where one watch could have like three different faces on it, and if you traveled, that was awesome to have. So he was ahead of his time. He really was. I mean, his reputation in his personal life, I know some things didn't go so great, but as far as being a watch designer and what he created, he really, I mean, he hit it out of the park. And anytime I ever had a secondhand Frank Mueller in my window, it's one of the fastest watches that would sell, because there wasn't a lot, whereas to where Rolex is, there was so many, and all the other
Hmm.
companies, even Patek, there was a lot compared to a Frank Mueller. So that's definitely a more obscure brand, but almost everything that he did, men's and ladies, and I think his ladies were as beautiful as his men's. Talking about women's watches, I think that's one of the prettiest women's watches that you could buy, and not anymore. Now all the companies are making gorgeous stuff, but in those days, that was one of the prettiest women's watches that were around.
Hey, Steve, quick question. If you go into a department store and you look at clocks, all the clocks are preset to 10 after 10.
Right,
Why is that?
because it looks like it's smiling.
Is that what it is? Really?
It is number one, and
See,
number
it's in the smell
two.
business too, huh?
And number two, that's the time that's not interfering with any of the writing on the watch. So the name and anything about the watch is usually positioned anywhere between like 11 and 1 o'clock, or 10:30 and 1:30, and then on the bottom also by the 6 o'clock position, there's usually more writing on the watch of
Hmm.
more details about the watch. So when the hands are usually set at 10:10, it looks like it's smiling and it's not blocking anything, so you get a nice visual of the whole watch.
Interesting.
Interesting. All right, so now I got another question for you. So, for let's say some of our younger orthodontist listeners who get out of school and have a lot of debt, but still maybe want to like start a collection, or want to look sharp. What would be a good, let's say, maybe more affordable starter watch for a recently graduated orthodontist?
There's a whole movement. It's called micro brands. I know them very well. I'm actually the service center for about five of them. Um, those are watches that a micro brand is usually a watch that's like under 1,500 bucks, but they start. Some of the micro brands start at like 200. So if
Hmm.
you go on and look at a company like Dan Henry, Dan Henry is an individual who was a watch collector when he was a teenager. The guy has a love and a passion for watches like no one else I've ever seen. He's probably got one of the most extensive collections in the world. You can even find his personal collection if you go to his site, his regular Dan Henry watch.com or whatever his site is. Just Google it. And then from his site, you can click on the bottom to his personal website that I think he has like 1,500 of his own watches up there with the
Oh,
year,
wow.
the model. It's so informative too. But he has a love and a passion for it. And he said, look, I want to create a watch that looks like a vintage watch, that has all the attributes of a vintage watch, but that's $200 or $300. Most of his watches are between like 200 and 400, and it's the biggest bang for your buck. Some are automatic and mechanical watches, but majority are quartz. So
Hmm.
that could be a big turnoff for some collectors. But for an orthodontist or somebody that's not necessarily a watch collector, I wear a Dan Henry a lot of the time, and I get as many compliments as I do on my Rolexes, and that's the truth. A couple other companies that I work with in the micro brands are Laurier, which is another husband and wife kind of team that created a really, really cool watch. And also, if you go online and Google Laurier watches, you'll see their collection. And then Baltic is another. It's a French watch company, and they also make some really, really good looking watches for 500-600 bucks that are automatic. Some of them are manual winds chronographs, and everything's kind of emulating a vintage watch. So they have the modern durability with the vintage look and feel. And they're water resistant and they're good for every day. So if you're working, you can use a watch like that, and you're not as worried about destroying it or, God forbid, getting moisture in your $10,000 Rolex. And it's a good starting point to even see if you like watches or if you love watches, or how in depth you want to get with your collection. So that's some good advice there as like a good jumping off point.
Awesome. So, we could talk about this forever, but we have to cut it off a bit right now. So, Steve, quick question now. As far as you had basically, as Barry was saying, the perfect watch for somebody that maybe starting out, just graduating, wants to find the perfect gift for somebody. Do you recommend? How do you determine if they should go with a vintage or new? Is that kind of like you buy a 1960 Corvette, or do you buy a 2021 Corvette? Is that kind of a good analogy, or is one more trending than the other? How do you determine that?
I think gifting someone a vintage watch is very personal. It's not easy. You have to really know the person, and then you have to give a gift where most of the time you have to say to somebody, hey, I'm giving you this great watch, but don't overwear it. Like, wear it when we go out to dinner, wear it occasionally. When you use the term vintage, a lot of times it falls into watches from, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, let's say even up to the 70s. And unless it was a Rolex or an Omega or something that was really beefy and durable, you just have to be a little more careful with a lot of these watches, even Patek Philippe's, especially, or Vacherons or Breguets. A lot of those watches were made in gold cases. They're soft. They weren't as water resistant back in those days. So if you're giving it, it's to be cared for and not to be used as an everyday watch. I think you could buy a second-hand modern
Mhm.
watch where you're buying a Rolex that's within the last 10 years, or an Omega or an IWC or any of the watches we mentioned, and then you're just buying it at a lower price than if you went out and bought it brand new. But once again, do your research, be very careful, know who you're buying it from, know the warranty, know the originality of it, find out if it's still water resistant. Very important question, because if it's not, it'll be a nightmare, and you can have a ruined watch and the company says, well, we told you it wasn't water resistant in the fine print,
Right.
and now you're screwed. As opposed
Mhm.
to, I sent a watch to Rolex that had water damage. It was a white gold Submariner, and they basically covered the whole watch at no charge without me even asking. I just sent it in for an estimate, and that's how they handle their product, because they know that shouldn't have leaked. Like, something went wrong, and we're going to take care of it, because that's our company and that's our policy. Secondhand companies, other companies, they're not necessarily going to do that. So just buyer beware.
Excellent. So, if somebody wanted to get more information, to take a look at your watches, to pick your brain, what's the best way for somebody to reach out to you there?
Sure, you can go to centralwatch.com. A lot of information about the history of the company. Our phone numbers on there. If you call us, somebody is going to answer. Where our customer service is as important as the service we do to the watches. So we're happy to educate you. We do, we can even look at stuff that you bought other places, and we can give you, an appraisal, an authentication, let you know if what you bought was a lemon or it is something good. I mean, we do charge for that, but at least you're going to get very thorough information with a picture of the watch and every number on there, as well as our comments on the watch. So, I'm happy to help always. I'm happy to educate. I'm doing this 31 years. If I don't know this by now, then I'm in big trouble that I did something wrong. But and then if it comes to service, we do things like we do battery changes all day long. We do the little things too. It's not like, we're this fancy place that'll only do, a full service on your watch. Or if your bracelet is broken, your crystal is cracked, a hand fell off your watch, you could bring any of those things to us, and we try not to make it a big deal unless it has to be.
Is there, because obviously we have people actually all over the world listening to this, but is that something that someone could mail into you, or is that,
Sure.
yeah?
Yes, definitely. No, we we get watches from all over the world, literally. I mean, we're around 70 years, but we've been written up in publications in other countries, and I've been on TV in other countries, and I have people like we're a destination. It's so funny. We run a Denmark show, which is like an television show for America, and the host there is obviously very popular. And he came in and he came into the shop, and we walked around, did the whole tour and everything. And to this day, I get people from Denmark coming with like the biggest smiles on their. I mean, they're the nicest people in the world, I think, from Denmark, and they come with the biggest smiles on their face because we were on TV with this celebrity, and they like had to come and see where he was in New York. So yes, all over the world, we get watches, but the problem is shipping internationally gets very tricky because you
Hmm.
get hit with big taxes for duty, and we mark it as a repair, but the customs may say no, it was a purchase, and now on a $300 repair you owe $1,000 in taxes. So I recommend if you're coming to the U.S. and you're coming to New York or anywhere in the U.S. and you want to mail it from there, absolutely. But international mailing and back and
Hmm.
forth could get tricky.
Hmm, interesting. All right,
Yeah.
Steve, got one last question for you. All right, so you're a New Yorker through and through. So if somebody just buys the perfect watch from you and now they want to go celebrate with a slice of pizza, where you sending them?
Wow. That's tough. I am true to heart a Patsy's guy. And I
Okay.
know, original, old school, not one of the 10 locations all over the place, but, although I did live on 80th and Columbus, and there was a Patsy's on 77th, I believe, and Columbus, between Columbus and
Taking a
Central
slice of
Park.
Patsy's though, or only a pie? I'm talking a slice.
Just a slice.
Yeah, I'm not saying go up to
Uh,
John's and get a brick oven. That's a pie, a
yeah,
slice.
but
You know.
everyone's gonna go to a place called Uncle Paul's Pizza. It's on 45th Street between 40 between 45th and 46th. It's on Vanderbilt Avenue,
Hmm.
and it's a guy that the guy just has a green thumb when it comes to making food, and his pizza is phenomenal, his food is phenomenal, his heroes are phenomenal, his bread is phenomenal. So go in there, ask for Dino. He's also a hell of a guy. I'll talk your ear off. You ever want to get somebody interesting on a podcast, I'll hook you up with him.
Oh, love that. That'd be great. Thanks.
I'll tell you, Steve, you sound like a man who knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, 31 years, like I said, if I don't, then I did something very wrong. So I'm
Right.
just, I like to be open, honest. I don't ever want to fool anybody. And, to get that in any industry, in any business, whether you're getting your teeth fixed or you're getting your watch fixed, it's nice to walk away and feel good that you're happy where you spent your money. And I try to show that, like I say, with our service and our warranty. Like, to give a 2-year warranty on anything means you have a lot of confidence in what you did.
Yeah, like I tell you, it's a pleasure to be a customer of
Thank you.
Grand Central Watch. So
And
I
vice
definitely
versa. And my kids' teeth are perfectly straight, so we're
There
good.
you go. Excellent.
thank God.
All right,
Yes.
Steve. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is great. Matter of fact, you got me motivated. I'm going to put my watch on tomorrow. So that's
And leave your house. So
exactly,
we're supposed to
exactly.
do that too.
I'll look good no matter what.
Totally.
All right. So again, thanks so much for listening, guys out there in podcast land. If anybody's interested, go buy a watch. You'll look good. And you'll make you smile. And once again, we're in the smile business. So everybody out there, happy St. Patty's Day. Spring's right on the corner for those of you that are in the cold weather months. So get ready; it'll be here soon enough, and baseball season's coming up. So if you're a Mets fan, let's go Mets! All right. So thanks
Yes.
everybody, and everybody be safe. Thanks, Steve.
Bye bye.
Bye.